Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now in today's one I want to talk about this budget gaming PC that I recently put together. It features a first generation Core i7 CPU, a Radeon R9 graphics card, 8 gigs of RAM and, well, I couldn't wait to see whether or not it could still game in 2020. We may eventually test out some of the individual components in a separate video too, especially the i7 because I have a feeling that it will probably be capable of a lot more than what you see today. But let's get into it, talk through the components, and I sort of put this build together a little backwards because it started life as something completely different, but we'll talk about that now. So this is definitely one of the better looking cases I've used for a second-hand PC. The problem with it was that it already had a completed system inside when I bought it. Actually, that's the opposite of a problem, but let me explain. Inside this thing was a Corsair 750 watt power supply, along with an ASRock Extreme 3970 motherboard and an old FX 4000 series chip. Instead of buying all the parts I wanted from the start for the i7 PC, I decided to see if I could sell what was inside this FX machine and make some money back that way, because it would mean I'd end up getting the essentials like the case, PSU and hard drives for much less. Basically, I paid £150 for the FX PC, sold the motherboard for £80, CPU for £30, and therefore only ended up technically paying £40 for a Zalman case, 750 watt power supply, as well as a 60 gig SSD and a 1TB hard drive, both of which came with the original FX system. This is riskier than just buying the parts you want from the start, but it can save you some serious money. That's 4 components at an average cost of £10 right off the bat. The FX machine did also come with some RAM that I could have sold, but I kept that for another time. So let's move on to the parts I had to buy myself. We have a quad-core 8-threaded i7 860, Intel DQ57TM motherboard, 8 gigs of DDR3, and an R9 290 4GB graphics card. The SSD and hard drive are different from the ones I showed you earlier, and this is because they were from a different machine that I was troubleshooting at the same time I was testing these drives. I should have swapped them back for the original ones before I started filming, but my bad. Overall then, we have a system that cost £175 here in the UK, $220 in the US, and 195 mainland euros. That didn't really work out. Yeah, that is just a direct conversion, so you may be able to build something much cheaper and better in your respective currency, but that's the only way I could think to do it because, as I've said before, prices are different depending on where you are. But it's time to see whether or not this first generation i7 build is still up to much in 2020 now. I've wanted to mess around with one of these processors for a long time. I have a feeling that it's got a lot more to give and is capable of a lot more when paired with a better graphics card, but we'll just have to see whether or not that R9 290 does prove to be much of a bottleneck. I'm sure the i7 would also love to be overclocked, but bear in mind, with an entry-level 1156 board like this, well, it's not really going to be possible. You will need a better board in order to make that happen. So a quick word on the GPU and CPU before we get into the games then. The i7 860 came out in the third quarter of 2009 at about $305 US. It has 4 cores, 8 threads and is clocked at 2.8 GHz with a max turbo frequency of 3.46. These days it can be found for a relatively decent price here on the UK used market. The R9 290 on the other hand is a 4GB GDDR5 graphics card that launched in November of 2013. This was also a high-end part. $399 US was the launch price, but now it can be found for a lot less than that. This is based on the Hawaii GPU architecture. And before you ask, yes, it's one of those cards that sounds a little like this. So, noise levels aside, can this combination game in 2020? Well, to find out, I've tested a few popular titles. Now, those of you expecting Call of Duty Warzone today, I'm afraid I'm going to have to test that another time or update the result in the comments, because as I opened up the game this morning, it hit me with a 40GB update, which on my internet will probably take all day today and all day tomorrow, so I will update the results for that game. Keep an eye on the pinned comment over the next couple of days, because I will put any results down there, or test it another time with an overclocked i7-860, because that's what I plan to do a little while in the future. Whilst we weren't quite able to achieve 60 frames per second in all of today's games, I think this combination did okay at 1080p. Starting off with GTA 5, and we were able to run this at the high in-game settings to achieve an average of 64 FPS. This figure, in combination with a 1% low of 46 and a 0.1% low of 42, made for a pretty reasonable gaming experience at 1080p. You'll certainly have a decent enough time in GTA 5 single player. Did anyone else see that it's being remade again, or remastered, sorry, for the PlayStation 5? I'm not sure whether or not the PC is going to receive any graphical updates, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Maybe that will affect performance, maybe it won't, because you can pretty much get this looking quite nice on PC as it is. When it came to Far Cry 5, we ran the game at the normal settings and achieved 52 FPS on average, with a 1% low of 44 and a 0.1% low of 34. Again, this meant that the gameplay was fairly smooth. There were a couple of minor drops here and there. Again, I ran the in-game benchmark test for this result, so this may vary ever so slightly from real-world gameplay, but as you can see here from the footage, it will come pretty close to that overall. It seems that the i7 and R9 290 go pretty well together in this game. If you want to turn things down to low, I don't think you'll see much in terms of a performance gain, but it will certainly help in getting you closer to 60 FPS, of course sacrificing a little bit of the visual quality. Now, I apologise if you are picking up any stutter here with Overwatch. The game looks a little bit stuttery on the recording, but I promise you that in actual gameplay it wasn't like this at all. It's something to do with the external recording device and this graphics card. I'm not sure what yet. I'm trying to work out what is going on here, but the game felt very smooth. Over 120 FPS at the high settings here. Overwatch still seems like a very popular title. I like to throw it into the benchmark roster every so often, but yeah, it had a respectable average frame rate, respectable 1% and 0.1% lows, so you'll have no trouble with this title at 1080p with the high settings using this combination of parts. Now, Shadow of the Tomb Raider started off a little stuttery, and then I noticed that Windows 10 was performing an update in the background, which actually affected things here. I didn't think it would. It started to cause a little bit of stutter, so I let Windows finish its unwanted update, and then retested the game, and 50 FPS was the average. This actually went up from 43 during the Windows update, and the 1% and 0.1% lows were improved as well. If you want closer to 60 FPS once again, then consider slightly lower settings, but at high with Hairworks turned off, we were able to see 50 FPS on this combination. We could have actually done with a more powerful graphics card in this situation, to be honest. Now, just like Overwatch, PUBG exhibited a few stutters here and there that were only present on the recording. It felt a lot smoother than this and looked a lot smoother. To be honest, when we were playing it, it just about scraped 60 FPS on average with 1080p and the medium settings. The 0.1% low was a little, well, low, so you can expect a little bit of stutter here and there. It was most noticeable as we were jumping out of the plane at the beginning of the game, but this benchmark run did start from the moment that we touched down on the ground, so I didn't include the stuttery mess that was the initial jump. Just like beforehand in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the graphics card was actually struggling here. We could have done with a more powerful GPU. That's why it'll be interesting to see how much better the i7 does when paired with something more powerful and when it's overclocked. So by default, Fortnite set itself to medium, and with the medium settings we saw 89 frames per second. This was another pretty respectable result. We could probably do with a better GPU here. I thought it would be the other way around, to be honest, with the i7 struggling more, but it seems to be holding up fairly well, and the graphics card really doesn't do too bad either. At least not for the price that we paid for the entire system, in my opinion. So perhaps the most surprising result today was Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm always surprised when this runs on older hardware, but with the highest performance preset we saw 42 FPS on average, with a 1% low of 33 and a 0.1% low of 26, so there really wasn't too much stutter to speak of. The game did error or crash first of all with a graphics card message of some sort, but after reinstalling the graphical drivers, well, things seem to work just fine. I'm always surprised or happy to see Red Dead Redemption 2 running with at least 30 FPS when it comes to these older CPUs and GPUs. So if you're looking at playing Red Dead Redemption 2, you don't mind a few graphical sacrifices, but ultimately you still appreciate the fact that it runs at least 30 frames per second and looks pretty decent in my opinion, then this combination will do okay. Just to get a better idea of how the CPU performed, I then ran Cinebench R20, and with a score of 950 points, it sat between the i3 4130 and the i5 3530, two CPUs that we have tested in the past. Now, of course, the i3 has 2 cores and 4 threads, and the i5 has just 4 cores, so you might see those two struggle a little more when it comes to running modern games. But there we have it. A first generation i7 build is still capable somewhat of running modern games. It could certainly do with an overclock, and that would be beneficial to a few processor intensive titles. I look forward to seeing what else it can do in the future when paired with a more powerful GPU, and hopefully you can join me then. We may also try and overclock the R9 a little more to see if that's got anything left to give. But as for this one, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you're still using a first generation Core i-series chip from Intel and how well it's working out for you down below in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.